Welcome to the Hunt Test Hobo podcast, your place for truckside chats and insights into the retriever game. Whether you're just getting started or you're a seasoned handler, this podcast is another resource for tips, tricks, and insights from both the amateurs and professional trainers' perspectives. Each week, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of retriever training, sharing stories of success, overcoming challenges, and forging stronger bonds with our dogs. This is the Hunt Test Hobo podcast. I'm Chris Rud, your host, fellow retriever enthusiast, and student of the game. Let's dive in.
Welcome to another episode of the Hunt Test Hobo podcast. Man, I hope you all are having an awesome pre-national training, if that's what you're doing, whether that's the Grand, the Master National, or, if you're getting ready for the Crown. I think I texted Jim Templeton, our last guest, and said, you have to be on the podcast before you run every SRS because it must be good luck for you to go win. So congrats to Jim for winning I think it was a Firewater SRS. So congratulations to him. And I guess if you want to be on the podcast to get good luck, shoot me a Facebook message. Well, it's been a weird time for me. Like I said, I think in the last podcast, I'm between houses and just trying to figure out my whole living situation. I think I got my deal done with my new house, so I'm excited to move to a place that I can have, as I tell everybody, 1 million dogs, which isn't really true. It's not even a full acre, but it's better than if you've seen where I lived before that. I was on a corner lot in a suburban area with no backyard and nothing. So anything is an upgrade, and I'm excited. One thing I wanted to start doing on these podcasts before each episode is I'm going to pick and do one random recommendation. So these are not people I'm sponsored by or anything. They're just random recommendations, and I'm taking those from messages that I got from people who've just reached out with the podcast. And if you guys can't tell, I have Mike Hurd on today, and he's got his dog who's loving on him right now.
Yeah.
But we'll get to talking with Mike here in a second. But I wanted to do recommendations on bumpers because I had 2 different people reach out to me this week and ask me what type of bumpers they use. And I'll say this, I don't think it matters that much, but if you have a problem, there's 3 bumpers that I've used in different scenarios to make things work. Well, one of them I really like is the Momarsh bumpers, which aren't cheap. They're really expensive. They have their down flaws, and I'll talk about, or their flaws, and I'll talk about those. But what I do like about it is I primarily use those for puppies because they're really light. I buy the big 3-inchers, and as soon as my dog is upgraded from a paint roller, I move right to those big Momarsh bumpers because they don't hurt their teeth. They're easy to grab, and you can chuck them a decent amount away from the gunner, and they don't create chomping or any of those negative habits because I like when the dog's mouth is really full as a puppy because they don't like to mouth it really at all. So I like to use those big 3-inch bumpers. The other bumper I really like, and I'm not a fan of some of the other products from this company, but I am a big fan of their bumpers, is the DT Systems soft mouth bumpers, which are also not really cheap, but they are excellent because they kind of balance both worlds of the Momarsh bumper, which is really nice because it sits on top of the water really nice. But the problem is if it's really windy, those light foam bumpers, those either the Kong ones or the Momarsh, trying to throw those suckers into the wind, it's just they don't go quite as far. So that's one of the downfalls to them. So the DT Systems is kind of a nice balance to that. They're really soft. They have a really nice feel. The dogs don't tend to chomp at them as much, but they're kind of expensive. So I only own like 5 or 6 of those suckers. But then my last one is I buy for most of my drill work, which comes after force fetch in my program, is I buy the cheapest bumper possible. So I have a bunch of anytime I like Gun Dog Supply. Anytime I see a sale for bumpers, you can buy like 20 for like, I don't know, they're like $3 a piece or something. I buy a bunch because I lose them. They fall off my ATV. They're nice and cheap. But I don't use those when the dogs are younger because they're really hard and they're tough on those dogs' teeth. And I don't like to use them when I'm just getting out of force fetch because you can start to see that chomping because I just buy the cheap 2-inchers. For everything else I've been talking about, I like to buy the big 3-inchers because I like them to sit really up top on high on the ground so that puppies can see them. So I don't know if that was helpful to anybody, but if you're having a chomping problem, I'd buy a bunch of those mole marshes and just use those primarily. So
Yeah, well, for puppy training, you're not going to have them very long. They're going to go through them pretty quick. So I wouldn't buy a whole bunch. I'd only buy a few and focus on the ones you're going to be using most of the time.
Yep, absolutely. Well, with that said, Mike Hurd is our guest today. And Mike, we're going to talk about your professional life, but I believe you messaged me and said you are the marketing and promotions or PR communications person for the AKC Master National. And so
Master Amateur.
Okay.
Yes,
sorry, I missed that part.
That's why I wanted these podcasts, because it's confusing.
Yes.
So it's the Master Amateur Retriever Club.
All right. Yeah. And so I've heard a lot about the Master Amateur, so I'm excited to talk about that. But before we get into that, I always like to have our guests on and talk a little bit about if they're an amateur like Mike.
Yep.
I want to hear a little bit more about like what your day job is and then how you got into dogs. So Mike, take it away.
Well, most folks know me as a weatherman, broadcast meteorologist. I get a lot of crap for that, but it's fun. It's fun.
We should have done it. Please tell me you're using a green screen and you put those master ribbons behind you.
No, this is my house. That's what you're seeing on the wall back there. Those are Master Amateur and Master National ribbons hanging on the wall back there. There's plates back there too. So anyway, I've been a broadcast meteorologist for about 37 years and hope to retire here in the next 5 or 7 years and
buy 25 dogs.
Hook up the RV and go run around the country and stuff like that. So I'm very excited for retirement, but it's still a little ways away.
Very
live
cool.
in Montana. It's a little on the cold side in the wintertime. We have very little window for training. We do train in the winter, but obviously no water. But our window is very short. And I'm also the president of the Treasure State Retriever Club north of Butte, Montana. We hold a lot of variety of events, AKC, HRC. We did our first SRS this past spring. It was fun and interesting to run. And we try and run some field trials, but that's getting a little more difficult. But there's a lot of field trials in our area. Just our club grounds are in the mountains and they're really rough. So at times they get overgrown and hard to throw 300-yard marks. But anyway, we have a lot of fun up at the grounds in Butte. It's beautiful property, but right now it is completely socked in with wildfire smoke coming from neighboring states. And I was up there over the weekend and it was just horrible air quality up there. But I'm back home and here talking about the Master Amateur Retriever Club.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So so tell me, how'd you get into dogs and what type of hunting do you guys do in Boise?
Bozeman.
I'm gonna be terrible about all this because anything south or pretty much west of like Nebraska is just west to me.
Yeah, it's new to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I have definitely seen Yellowstone, so that's about as close as I get to understanding anything about Montana. And I know I'm just gonna shout this out. I know Margot is gonna be texting me every little error I make about where she loves, and she invited me to run the SRS. I couldn't make it happen this year, but she's a good person and excited that you guys partnered up on that. I believe, right? She was pretty involved in that SRS. So excited.
Yeah. We've been trying to put that on for years and finally made it happen this year. So, and Margot, a shout out to Margot, once you're talking about her. Margot Linger, Ellis Linger. She is really responsible for the explosion of HRC in this region. Started off in Bozeman area, then moved to Butte, and neighboring states just started picking up on it because they were really interested in it. And I think the HRC clubs have really exploded here in the northwestern part of the country. And I think she's a large part of that. So if you know Margot, give her a shout out. And again, she's trying to do a little SRS stuff, and we're trying to have fun with that as well. But one of our fantastic club members and regional members as well.
Yeah, she's awesome. I mean, we hung out at I think it was last Falls Grand in,
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember where we were, but anyway, it was awesome.
Yeah.
She's got a great personality.
Mm-hmm.
She fell in love with Winter, and every time Winter would walk by, she'd act like she's going to steal her from me. So I didn't let her. But yeah, she's become a good friend after running that Grand, and that's what I love about this dog game is that you hear from different parts of the country that they only run AKC or they only
Mm-hmm.
run HRC. I've never experienced that because like I'm in Northern Illinois, Wisconsin is where I run mostly, and there's huge clubs for both. So but it's interesting to hear kind of in those outlying states like how it's growing in certain areas and doing its thing. So
Well,
how'd you get into hunting
I
or
started in
dogs?
dogs
Yeah.
when I got married in 1990. First thing we did, my wife and I, was bought a chocolate Labrador from a local breeder, $200, and I had a brother-in-law that had quite a bit of ground south of here near Dillon, Montana, and did a lot of waterfowl hunting. And I wanted a dog to help me with that. And that was the best family dog I ever had, but that was also the worst dog I ever had for retrieving, because in 1990 there was no information on how to train a dog. The e-collars were horrible. They only had these little plugs that you stick in on the top of them, and there was very, very little information. And I was out throwing these little bumpers out in a field near a high school, this empty field, and this old guy drove up, gets out, and I mean, he was a rough-looking guy, and he came up to me with a grumpy voice. I thought he was going to yell at me for throwing these bumpers for my dog, but he came up to me and said, "Hey, kid, you want to learn how to run that dog?" And I said, "Okay." And he got me involved in the Treasure State Retriever Club, and his name was Alex Zabitnoff. Him and his wife. I could spend hours talking about both of the Zabitnoffs, and Burl, his wife, was the club secretary for a long, long time. And in those days, when you did a draw, you had to mail in your entry on a piece of paper, fill it all out, and then we would take all of them and separate them out into stakes. We were running field trials at the time. And she would pull a piece of paper out, look at it, and go, "Oh, I know that guy," and just go on for an hour talking about that dog and how she saw that dog in some other state when they went east for the winter. We'd spend 4 hours doing a draw because she had all these fantastic stories. But it was because of them that I got involved in the club, and they really helped me kind of introduce to the grounds and how to train. And then I got my second dog, which was an English lab, and she had horrible allergies, and I actually had to put her down early because she just couldn't function, and I couldn't do anything with her. But she only lived for about 6 or 7 years. And then my third dog, I bought and learned about pedigrees, and a friend of mine, which was a neighbor who was also a club member, she told me about this litter out of the Dust Devil folks down in Arizona, and that dog's name was Dusty. And when I got that dog, like, oh my God, I could tie him to the front bumper of my truck. He would pull it across the street. He was just a powerhouse of a dog, and he was way too much of a dog for me. And I learned that there was a pro that lived about 45 minutes from me. His name was Bill Totten, and he was also, for the longest time, the president of the Professional Retriever Trainers Association. And I would go down there every day and train for 4 hours, then go to work at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I did that for 10 years. And it got to the point where I could go down and train with Bill. Bill not only trained my dog, but he also helped train me to train my dog. And that was one of the things that I desperately needed. But I took that dog and got him an amateur field champion. I went to a national amateur with him. Then when he got a little older, he would actually slow down a little bit. He loved to go long. That's all he wanted to do was run 400 or 500 yards and go long. And he was a line running dog. In fact, on my YouTube channel, one of the most watched videos or the first two I put on there. And one of those was of Dusty running 3 cold blinds down in California. And God, they were like 400 or 500 yards. He lined 2 of them and only had 1 or 2 whistles on the other.
Wow.
And that was me running him. And I told him at the time, I've never ran blinds that far. I could hardly see where the piles were in myself. And he was just fun. He was just a fun dog. He was just a quick learner, had a lot of desire, and I was able to do a lot of fantastic things. But once he got older and slowed down, then I was able to bring him down to run hunt tests, and I got an MH, Master Hunter, and a HRCH on him, because at that time we were just introduced to the Hunting Retriever Club, and he absolutely loved that. He thought that was the funnest thing in the world to go out there and actually thought he was out there hunting. So I had a lot of fun with him. And when he passed away, I picked up another dog, and she was fantastic. She was another one of those dogs that I got from Barbara Howley in the Pacific Northwest. And in our area, there was a dog named Nitro that everybody fell in love with, because Nitro would throw really good marking dogs. And we always look for Nitro in the pedigree somewhere. And so she introduced me to that. And that little dog was fantastic. However, when she got to about 10 years old, I was running the Master National in Oregon. And I knew ahead of time, because she was doing some weird stuff. She would I tried to get her qualified, but she'd go on water marks and she would drink water all the way out to the bird, come back, drink water all the way out to the next one. And by the time she picked up 4 birds, she was so bloated with water, I literally had to pick her up and put her head down to kind of squeeze her stomach to get all that water out. And, after a couple of events like that, I took her to the vet and found out that she had Cushing's disease. And it was a tumor. So I've heard pros say that if they snatch birds off the rack and want to eat the birds, and if they drink a lot of water, it's probably Cushing's disease. But that's one thing I want to pass on to your listeners and viewers, that your dogs are doing some weird stuff and you just don't understand it. You got to get them into the vet and figure out if it's something medical, because 9 out of 10 times it's probably there's something going on with the dog that you need to remedy. But when that was about 6 months before the Master National, and she was on some medication to help curb that, but I knew she had tumors in her gut. And the time I took her to Master National, it was just going to be her last event anyway. But unfortunately, I got through 3 series, and I get her out of the truck, and she was shaking so bad she could even hardly stand up, and it was devastating. I had to bring her into the local vet and had her put down while I was running the Master National. So that was very upsetting. But I've got 3 more dogs here, and for the first time, I don't know why I did this, I bred one of my older dogs, and I got a puppy out of him. But I went to Giddings, Texas for the Master Amateur Invitational, and I just happened to run into the last dog in the litter from Kim Warren. She was breeding heavily to fox. And I thought, well, that's a national champion. I said, well, I'll pick that one up too. So I got 2 puppies. I got one at 17 months and one that just turned a year old. So I'm doing double the dog training work at the moment and trying to get them ready. I'm going to run the older dog in his first derby here in a couple of weeks.
Very cool.
Yeah. So when I get dogs, I typically run them through my field trial program first to see if they're going to make it through the field trial program. And if they're not, then I'll bring them back down and run hunt tests. But my goal is always to have another amateur field champion and run at the national field trial level. I love that part of the competition, but I also enjoy the hunt test side of things. And I'm probably a rare breed where I like to run just about anything and everything that's out there and have a lot of fun doing that. So that's kind of a long story, but I've had a lot of dogs in the last 35 years that I've been an amateur. Had a great opportunity to learn from a professional that I'm really, really good friends with. I try and go up into the Ronan area of Montana. There's a lot of pros up there. Try and train with them periodically as well. I love professionals. I love going to seminars and learning from professionals. And what I'm talking about today is I'm not trying to pit an amateur against a professional or the Master National against the Master Amateur. I just want to talk about the differences between the two and the similarities. and trying to encourage amateurs out there to step on up, run your dogs, and have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we're talking about the Master Amateur because I don't know anything really about that. I do.
Good.
There's two guys that in our area have run it. I shouldn't say they're in my area. They're like, probably 6 hours away. But I've been to group trainings, and they were driving through, and they said they're getting ready for it. I believe it was like in June or something. Maybe it was 2 years ago. It was early. Earlier than I thought. And so, yeah, I mean, I know that I'm excited to learn about it. And the other thing is that I if anybody else has any of these type of topics where it's like, hey, I would love to clarify something in the retriever game, reach out to me. We'll do a little conversation and talk about it. Like, cause I did that podcast with Barton, the difference between a British lab and an American lab. And the response has been unbelievable about people like, wow, I never really understood the other side. And there's something to that about bringing, I mean, none of us are we're not fighting each other. We're just trying to make sure that we understand each other and what the games are and let people choose. I'm very similar to you. I like running anything that I can, run a dog. I like to challenge myself. I like to challenge the dogs, and it depends on, what our goals are. And I like running field trials, and I like running. I love running finished. It just doesn't matter to me. I just like to go and play with dogs. So, I think that's really cool.
I don't get as nervous as I used to running hunt tests and field trials. But boy, I tell you, when I ran that SRS, oh my God, I was like, it was the first time in a long time I got that excited about running a dog, and I blew it on the poison bird. But anyway,
they
gave me crap for that.
It's nerve wracking, man. It's like, cause it's so much. I feel like some of the other games, it's really about like the preparation work that you did. Like if you've done your work, you're kind of it's going to be what it's going to be. You're not going to, you're not along for the ride, but to some degree, you're kind of along for the ride, right?
Yeah.
Well, when you go to an SRS, and they're like, well, you're going to do this, and you're going to do calculus over here, and then you're going to do this, and you're this, and it's so much more about the handler. It makes it puts a lot more pressure on you to be very quick and responsive, and kind of think 6 steps ahead of your dog, not 2 steps, like 6. So anyway, they're a lot of fun. So do you hunt at all?
I do a little bit, but be honest with you, I've got a lot of friends that hunt and hunt a lot. I've got a good friend of mine out of Helena, and his dog is practically deaf because he hunts too much with them and hunts too close, and especially in upland. And I was like, So I hunt a little bit. I used to hunt a lot, but be honest with you, I have a lot more fun running and training for competitions and master and amateurs. Trying to get to a Master Amateur Invitational is always one of my priorities. And to do that, I hunt a little bit, but I'm also afraid they're going to get hurt and ruin any chances I have of the future. So I don't do a lot, but I do a little bit every now and then. If it's not going to be too taxing on them or too hard, and I got to be careful. So I'm trying to be very, very careful with what I do with them on the off season. But I spend a lot of money and a lot of time trying to run field trials and hunt tests, and that's what I love more than hunting.
Yeah, no, I can totally appreciate that. I've had bad experiences hunting too, so kind of the grass is I'm having a new perspective about the dog I've talked about a lot on the podcast with Rex, who lost. I would say he's partially deaf now, because I don't know if he had a super bad ear infection, but it's come back enough to where he can legitimately hear me out now with a whistle at the 150, 175 yards. It's still never going to be able to be an SRS dog, which was my goal for him. But I'm going to see how it goes, and maybe I'll try to finish getting a grand title, because he has 1 grand pass, and he still needs a lot of HRC points. But I think he could do it. But on the other end of it is I already take him hunting a couple times this year. Like, that's what we're going to do, and then that's just, and that way the other dogs that I'm campaigning with, I just don't have to, they can have their break, and then he can have his time. So we'll see how all that plays out. But I'm like torn, because I don't want to get my hopes up that he can that he can do it. And then like,
Yeah, right.
you get in some running water scenario at the Grand and he can't hear me at 30 yards. It's going to be really depressing.
Well, you can't turn around and tell the judge, sorry, he can't hear me, but they're going to say, yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Like, can I shock him right now? Because then he'll
Yeah,
stop.
right.
I don't think that's going to work. Well, cool. Appreciate you talking about that. So let's talk about, the difference between the Master National. So I'll set this up a little bit. So for those that maybe don't know, there's two sides kind of to the retriever game. There's the UKC side, which is the United Kennel Club, and the HRC program and the SRS are part of that club. And typically that's where you see on pedigrees the HRC titles, the Grand Honey Retriever titles. You'll also see, the SRS titles, and I believe all of those are on the front end of the pedigree. Then on the other end, other side of that is the AKC, which is the American Kennel Club, which I believe is much longer because of field trials. Field trials were kind of the original dog game here in the U.S., and you'll see titles of FC, AFC, NAFC, NFC, and those are also on the front end of the pedigree. Those mean a ton if you ever see any of those on a dog's pedigree. And then they have the hunt test side, which is on the back half of the pedigree. When I say that, like the registered name, Redwood, Scratch Winner's Itch, and then you see MH for Master Hunter, or I don't know, what's the Master Amateur title?
So it's an MAH.
MAH.
So Master National will be an MNR or NMH. Master National Retriever or Master National Hunter. You want the MNH. That's what you're trying to get. That gets you into the Hall of Fame. Yep. It's the same on the amateur side. If you get an MAR, Master Amateur Retriever, it means you had 2 passes. And if you get an MAH, that means you're in the Hall of Fame. So, and there's some dogs on the amateur side that have passed 6.
Wow.
And that's listed on the Master Amateur Retriever Club website. And if you want to learn more about it, that's the place to go, because there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of interesting facts. There's every single event we've ran. All the blog stuff is sitting there. If you want to go back and look at the diagrams and how the tests were set up, etc. That's, you want to learn more, that's the place to go, the Master Amateur Retriever Club website.
Very cool. And that same thing is in for the Grand. If everybody ever wants to look at the Grand, if you get the past issues of some months, I can't remember what, it happens twice a year. I know that. And there's 2 issues a year where they put the Grand diagrams in there, which I found was really helpful when I was preparing for my first Grand. I would see those setups and I'd go try to set something up relatively similar. So that's really cool that the Master Amateur does something that's super similar to that, probably in a little bit better format with the Grand, or with the website, which I think is really cool. So what's the difference between the Master Amateur and the Master National?
Good question. So the Master National, all you have to do is run Master, AKC Master tests on the weekend to get qualified. So you got to get, I believe, 6 to qualify to go to the Master National. Clubs around the country pay dues to the Master National, and those clubs. So you have to run Master Hunt tests at those clubs that are part of the Master National. So it's on the shoulders of the club to pay the dues, and I don't think it's very much. I think it's $150 a year or something like that. And that's how you qualify for the Master National. Great program. Absolutely love the Master National. I run a lot of them. I have nothing but good things to say about it. On the Master Amateur side, you have to pay dues. You have to become a member of the Master Amateur Retriever Club. You can have annual dues. You can have lifetime dues. That's all listed on the website. So it's up to you. It's only like $50 a year. It's really cheap. But that's step number 1. If you want to run a Master Amateur Invitational, you have to become a member of the Master Amateur Retriever Club. And then the Entry Express will start following you and making sure you have your passes and the amateurs ran that dog and how to get qualified. So right now you only need 4 passes, a Master Hunter pass on a weekend test. And that is not, you can go to any Master, as long as you're a member of the Master Amateur Retriever Club, you can go to any retriever event around the country that have a Master stake and run that to qualify for your dog. You need 4 at the moment. We kind of flip flop. Sometimes we have 4, sometimes we have 6, but we found that if you get 4, that seems to be the sweet spot for the number of passes for the entries to come to get into the invitational on the year. So that's one subtle difference. So, but it's a big one. So that's step number 1. If you want to run to the Master Amateur Invitational, you have to become a member of that organization.
And that's no different than the SRS. The SRS, you have to become a
Mhm.
member of it.
Yes.
The HRC club, you have to become a member. I think, honestly, the AKC Master, like the AKC is probably the only one that's different that
Mhm.
that the clubs are paying those dues.
Yeah.
So if you're hearing that, that shouldn't, that's not a big deal at all. Now,
Mhm.
I did want to clarify I know that to qualify for the Master National, for the regular, like the Master National, you have to have 6 passes in a year, versus what you guys are doing is 4, which
4.
I find that the biggest limitation a lot of times from my friends that say they don't run the Master National is the qualifying for that, like to go around and qualify. But 4 seems a lot more obtainable than 6,
Yeah,
especially
you're
when it takes a
spending
whole weekend.
$500 or more per weekend running a test. So, I mean, it helps a little bit on the pocketbook as well. But yeah, 4 seems to be the sweet spot. And because our entries at the Master Amateur side, we usually only have 1 or 2 stakes. So like the Master National,
Yeah, you could have
there's
10
weeks
or
they
8.
have like 7 or 8 or something like
Okay,
that. I mean, they're running a lot of dogs. And again, the other subtle difference between the Master National and Master Amateur, if you run those events, the Master National can take up to 10 days to run and complete. Sometimes they get 4 or 5 series in. Sometimes they get 6. It just depends. Kind of depends on time and time management, how many dogs they have. I mean, they're juggling a lot, and that's a big task to ask for that organization. Now, the Master Amateur is usually 1 or 2 stakes, and it's around 100 dogs per stake. We've never had 3, but I mean, we're always prepared for that. And it's on the East Coast this year, so they may get to 2 or 3 stakes, but definitely have the property to do that. But right now, we're planning on a double stake, an A and a B stake for the Master Amateur up in Maine.
Wow, that's got to be cool. That would be a cool place to travel.
Every single Master Amateur in the 8 years we ran this have got it done in 5 days, and they run 6 series. So that's a subtle difference. So it's about half the time, and you will get 6 series in at the Master Amateur because they don't have as many dogs, and time management a little bit easier. And what I like about the Master Amateur, if you ever run a Master National, the worst thing you could do, is drive all that way over there, spend all that time, and go out in the first series.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens to a lot of people because they're trying to get dogs in and get them in, get them out, get them in, get them out, and and they're looking at whittling that number down so they can get it done. At the Master Amateur, you will more than likely, if you don't screw up royally in the first series, you're probably going to get back to at least the second. So you get to play a little bit longer. However, I think the pass rate this year was down to about 33%. Out of the 100 dogs that were entered. So they're getting a little harder. And I've heard rumblings from around the country that the Master Amateur was a lot easier than the Master National. But I can tell you that is not the case. I've run both. And I know at the Master National side, they are very short marks, very short blinds, very technical because they want to get dogs in and get dogs out. At the Master Amateur side, they're a little bit longer, they're a little more relaxed, but they're a little more challenging as well. And the 6th series in Washington near Carnation, that was a doozy of a test, and that's on the blog. They had a wipeout bird, they had a land-water combo, they had a lot going on, and it was fun to watch dogs run at that level. Well, those are some of the subtle differences between Master National and the Master Amateur. Again, both great organizations, but if you are an amateur and you got a dog, and most amateurs probably send their dog to a pro, which is highly recommended. I don't see anything wrong with that. However, pros should be trying to encourage those amateurs to run those dogs themselves. Don't just settle for a pro running the dog. Get out there and run that dog and have fun
it's
with
a lot
it.
of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, because you get to run both. And that's what I loved about the field trial side. I could run the national open and I can run a national amateur. If I can qualify for both as an am. So it
So
can be a lot of fun.
when did the Master Amateur start? And what was kind of the reason that it came to be? I think you're hitting at some of these things, but I'd just like to ask that question.
There was a lot of conversations around the country, I think back in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. And a lot of it came from the Master National folks that were running the Master National, organizing it and stuff, etc. And I believe they strongly supported the idea of kind of following in the footprint of the field trial side, right? You had an amateur national and you had an open national. And that's listed in the history on our website if you want to read more about it. But it took them a couple of years to get organized and get a charter. And they put the first one on, I think, in 2016. So it's been around the country twice. So they've had eight national events.
Yeah. Very cool.
This year it's back on the East Coast, and we're going to start our third round around the country. So it runs time zones. So it's on the East Coast, the Eastern region. Then 2026, it moves to the East Central region, then the West Central region the year after that, then the Western region the year after that, and then back to the East Coast. And you'll find that with all nationals. On the AKC side, they migrate around the country.
Yeah. Do you guys know where you guys are going to do it when it hits the Central time zone, which would be like the Chicago area?
That's a good question, because they're going to start having those conversations. I'm on the board with the Master Amateur, and so far that has not come up yet. And a lot of times, I think the last two times it's been in that region, it's been down in Sedalia, Missouri.
Yeah. I think
that's
really
a beautiful
cool
area.
It's nice, because I get why it's less numbers, because you at first, like, you think, well, maybe it's probably not as stiff as of a competition, but if you think about it, it's probably the same amount of, or close to the same amount of dogs that is running the Master National that are amateurs, right? Because there's like what, it was like 1,000 dogs or something last year at the Master Nationals. Yeah. It was a lot. That's a lot of dogs. But you I think, like, between Clark and Lyle, like, I don't remember, I'm totally gonna butcher this, but it was like 25 to 35 dogs they have qualified. That's in one pros or two pros, trucks, and then I know that Jobman qualifies a ton of dogs. So I don't know what the ratio is, pros to amateurs. I know people probably have went and figured that out, but do you know if that's
I don't know the percentage, but from the Master Nationals that I've ran, there was only like 2 or 3 amateurs mixed in with 200 dog stake.
Yeah.
It was pro after pro after pro after pro for 2 hours, and then an amateur runs.
Yeah.
But for the pros, that's all they have, and it's their national, right? They're there for that reason. But again, an amateur can run both.
Yeah.
And if you have the time and the money, I mean, that's the way to go. Because you can get a whole new set of titles on your dog and the amateur side. So
yeah,
you can't do that at the Master National. Pros can't get that for those dogs.
So are you going to run the Master National this year?
I retired my older dog.
Okay,
He's
yeah.
about 10 and a half.
You got puppies, so
yeah, and I got 2 puppies. Yeah, so no, so I'm training new puppies, and maybe in a couple of years I'll start getting back at running both the Master National and Master Amateur, and again, hopefully, a national amateur or national open on the field trial side.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So one of the things I'm doing is the next podcast that's coming out after this is a conversation with Jeremy Legg and myself about prepping for the Grand, like things that you need to prep for the Grand. So for either Master Hunter, Master National, Master Amateur National, what are some of the things that you think are really important to do that are often forgotten by folks who are preparing for those national events?
They always have a week before the national, and they have a training opportunity. You get into a property draw and you get into a group and you train. And from what I've seen, a lot of them are running the hardest thing they can in the pre-national setups. I've always had the mindset of saying, you know what, I qualified, I trained, I'm here. I don't need to test them for a week before the test. So I do a lot of singles off of multiple guns, might mix in a blind in there. So I like to dumb it down a little bit when I come to pre-national training. I don't want to over exercise the dogs. I just want to get them used to the region they're in, depending on the weather, if it's hotter than it usually is at home, those kind of things. And I think a lot of people freak out before a national event, and they think they have to train, and really run the dog into the ground. And you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Most nationals are just a tiny little bit harder than your weekend event. So, I mean, if you're whizzing through master tests weekend after weekend after weekend, then yeah, you need to step up your training a little bit, because the national side, both the Master National and the Master Amateur, are going to be just a little bit more difficult than you would see on a weekend test. And those are just basic concepts that you have to try and build, but it's not the week before. It's got to be months and months before you even consider running at a national level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I tell a lot of folks, and we're going to talk about this in the next podcast, is you should be preparing 2 to 3 months before for whatever that national event is. And the week before, like you mentioned, is not about training as much as it is just getting the dogs comfortable with the routine, especially for us amateurs. Like my dogs sleep on the floor and they're hanging out, and I get up every morning and they're like, "Hey, we're going to go train." I'm like, "Yes, we're going to train today and we'll go train," but then they're back in the house laying around. Well, it's different to be in a box, which is what happens typically when you're traveling for events, unless you have a camper that you can let the dog lay around in. But that doesn't work for me. So a lot of this is getting them used to that routine. That to me, about the routine, the feeding schedule, the airing, that's really what, at least for the first couple national events, that's really what I'd like that first week to be about, the pre-grand training. And to me, it's about cooking food and having a good time.
Yeah, well, exactly.
And if you got a good group, you're not stressed. Like I've been in groups where I was like, oh my gosh, we're trying to get dogs in. We're trying to do too much. And my dog missed one mark. I'm never going to pass a test again.
Yeah.
you just that's just not the way to approach it. So focus. Yeah. So I'll ask this question then. What type of things do you focus on for master events or master national events the months prior? Like, do you focus on different things or elevate
if I'm going to run a Master National, I know that they're going to be a little shorter and a little more technical, and I'll start working on that. And in my training program, again, I'm always training at the field trial side. So I'm trying to get them to the highest level they can. I'm running 400-yard marks. I'm running 500-yard blinds. That wall for them is way out there. They're not going to hit a wall and be afraid to go long. So now I got to bring them in and say, hey, you got to do some 30-yard marks. You got to do a 50-yard mark. You got to do some converging marks with a blind up the middle. And, I really got to just work on shortening them up and having them check down at the Master National side. Not that they don't throw long marks, but again, me personally, I'm training for quals and opens and amateurs as well as hunt tests. So for me, I have to bring that down just a little bit in hidden guns and not as much noise and stuff like that. I'll tell you, one of the greatest things in my training program, I've had a lot of success with this, especially when running at the HRC side, as a lot of the times, if it's a windy day, they're not going to hear that winger go off, and they could totally miss a bird. I like to train and teach my dogs to, I think Lyle Steinman calls it point and shoot, but I like the line. If I get them up there and I point them at something, they're going to carry that line, and they're going to carry it until they find something. And it's usually trying to get them just a little bit downwind. And I tell you, that has saved me in a lot of HRC tests, and it can in AKC side too. If they didn't see a bird, and you can have confidence that they're going to take a line, and point them at a tree, a rock, or something that's out in the field, you could save yourself because they didn't mark it, but the judges won't know that in their book.
Yep, yeah, that's good. And I did a podcast with my friend Tyler Brenner. Maybe it's like 6th or 7th episode. Y'all can listen to that one. We talked about kind of our process for what we call no-see birds. Where, all right, you didn't see this one. This is how we teach it. Older dogs tend to just be like, okay, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to run out there on my name. But sometimes it takes, we got to work through it a little bit with dogs that maybe aren't as confident and really feel like they need to see something to go. So, and not in a blind scenario, I'm talking about a mark. So that's something that would really good for either event as you get ready for the Masters or the national events that are coming up here. So Mike, I appreciate you talking through all this. Is there anything else about the Master Amateur that you wanted the listeners to hear that we haven't covered yet?
Well, one of the other things that in the Master Amateur doesn't have any say in this whatsoever. It's an AKC rule. But when you register your dog to run at a master event and you get into the amateur set aside, some clubs have 25%, some have 35%. If you register that dog in the amateur set aside, a pro better not run that dog. And they get away with this a little bit. And I'm not trying to come down on professionals, but clubs need to be a lot more aware of who enters that dog and who is running that dog. Because in the AKC rules, an amateur can run that dog even if the owner registered it on the amateur set aside, but a professional cannot. And I think that gets kind of swept under the rug a little bit, and marshals just don't know one way or the other. So we need to be careful with that for the most part and be cognizant of it. So that little bit of information, I think, is critical, and it's something that something needs to happen there on the AKC side or something. But I wish when you get the packet from Entry Express and the American Kennel Club, it would have that information on the marshal's sheet, and they just don't list that I'm aware of at the moment. But just that little bit of information. Because the AKC has been very gracious of letting amateurs try and get into master tests, and that was one way to slip in. But it's still, you try and enter a master, within 2 minutes, it can fill up.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast those fill up.
It can, yeah.
Versus, that's so funny, like the other side, the AKC side, nobody registers until the last minute. It's just so different because there's limits to hunt test game for good reason, but it does make it hard for us to register. So, well, Mike, I appreciate you being on, man. This was I learned a ton that I didn't know about, and especially the 4 master tests, to qualify versus the
and this year it's
6.
in Waterville, Maine. It was the same location that the that the National Amateur ran this year. So it's up in the northeastern United States. So, I mean, hey, get qualified, go up and have some lobster.
Yeah.
Have a lot of fun up there. It'll be in the end of June. And that's the other thing the Master Amateurs trying to do is hold a little later in the spring, early summer, in higher latitudes. So the first handful of years it's been in the south in April and early May. Now they're trying to do a little bit later and go to the northern half of the country.
Yeah, that's something that I really appreciate because of being up in the north. Like I thought for a long time that the spring grand was kind of out of my reach, just because, I mean, the first spring grand I ran, it snowed that morning, like when I left. So, I mean, that was just a cold snap, but still, it's really a challenge for us northern folks to do it. So I'm excited that the spring grand this year is in late May. I don't remember the exact date of it, but it's up here in Wisconsin. Great grounds. If you guys are all looking for a good spring grand to go to, this one will be great. It's not my host club. It should be. I do now realize that it's like the closest HRC club and so I need to join. But they put on an awesome event. They have, I think, 4 flights or 5 flights of finished just for our normal finished test that they do twice a year. It's a well-oiled machine. It's great grounds.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for a really, your first grand, it's going to be late, which is going to be helpful. You can get a lot of good training in. But so I appreciate that you guys are doing that same thing, like having it later in June or in June, because it gives us an opportunity to do that for us northern folks here.
It's the northern half of the country. We don't get our dogs in the water until late May, early June, because it's too cold. So, and so they have it later. It gives us an opportunity to have our dogs in peak performance.
So I appreciate that. Well, Mike, thanks again, man. This was fun. Glad to meet you. You're the first guest that I hadn't actually met before. So I texted around and people said you're a good dude. So and it proved out to be true. So I'm glad you got on.
Yeah. Thank you. So just one last word, just, hey, folks out there, amateurs, consider, trying to get qualified for the Master Amateur Invitational in Maine in 2025.
Thanks.